Hello again, this is a continuation of the final HTML assignment for the University of Guelph-Humber course AHSS3080. What we're going to do in this video is finish off the title area, work on the content area, and also add some a image to the background. Quick recap of what we've done so far. We have this header with link to the home page. We have our navigation added. We've blocked out the different areas for the title, the content, and the footer, and we finished off the footer including social media links. The folder itself, in the folder we have our 3 different icons for the social media links. In my case they're called Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube. We also have the website style CSS file, as well as the about HTML file. 2 other images that I've added into this folder are my background. So this is a tiled background that we're going to use. In my case this is just a wood texture, but you can use whatever you want. You'll notice the dimensions on mine are quite small. It's not going to be an image that takes up the entire background. It's going to be a small image that repeats to take up the entire background. And I have a photograph of, that's not a photo of me, but you'd most likely use a photo of you in this assignment. To jump right into it, we're going to first start off by adding the repeating background to the actual page. So right now the background is just white. To do that, you're going to first figure out where you're going to put that repeating background image. So if we look at our HTML file, we have to go right to the first real element that we use. In this case, it's going to be the body. We're going to add that repeating background to the body, and we're going to do that in the CSS file. I don't have any styles added to the body yet, so I'm going to add it here. Remember that if it's an existing HTML element, then you don't need to use a period to start the style, and in this case it is an existing HTML element. So I can just start it off by typing body background color, oops, not background color, we're going to use background image, and I'm just going to browse to, I called mine wood BG for wooden background, and then finish that off. And if I've done this correctly, if I refresh the page, there we go, we have the wooden background over the entire file. Next up, let's add the background to this title area. In a later video I'll show you how to put a background image. In this case, for this assignment, all you need to do is have a consistent background solid color. To do that, I'm going to jump a few steps ahead. I know the photo that I'm using is going to be this, so in my case I'm just going to pick a color from this photo. Not something you necessarily have to do, but just something that visually matches. So I'm going to use the eyedropper tool and just pick one of these green colors. That looks good. And if I double click on this, it gives me all of this information about that specific green color, including the hexadecimal value of that color. So I'm going to copy this, and that's what I'm going to use as the background color for the title area. If we look back into here, if we look at the HTML document, we have the title area here. Right now we only have the word title inside that title area, but I want to add the background color to that CSS style. So if I jump back to CSS and look for title, is right there. All I'm going to do here is I've copied the color that we're going to use, that I'm going to use for the background color. You copy that from Photoshop, I'm going to paste it in there. If you're using custom color like that, make sure that you start off with that number sign. Save that and preview this, and it should change this area to a green, and that's worked all right. Next I want to change what's actually written in here. So it's not title in this case it's about, because it's the about page. I'm going to leave myself a little note saying change this title on other pages, just as a reminder. So for example, On the contact page, this will say contact instead of about. Save that just to make sure it's changed properly. If I refresh it, there we go, it's changed to about. I also want to change how that looks, the actual font face and style and spacing of it. So if I go back into the CSS, I'm going to change the style of the way the text shows up on that area. So I'm going to copy some of the same styles that we've already used. So I'm going to keep the font family the same as Verdana. I'm going to make sure that, actually let's make sure that that's changed alright. Everything looks good there. Next I want to change the color, the size, and where it's placed. So right now the text is kind of rammed to the left and the top. I want to space it out a little bit. So to do that, inside the title, so if you think of the title as, that title div as this box here, we want to add some spacing to that. Because we're adding spacing to the inside of this rectangle, it would be padding. So if we say padding of 10 pixels, and it actually changed the size. You'll notice change the height a little bit because we defined the height already, but then we added some extra padding to the inside of it, which the way it's calculated, the height that we've already defined gets added to the padding that we have. It didn't add any width because it's already defined by the overall width of the container div that we created. Not a big deal unless you're using an image as your background, then you'll have to tweak it a little bit. If you really want to make sure that the height of the div is the exact same as what you did initially, you can just go back and subtract the overall height. So the padding is added to all four sides, left, top, right, bottom, and we can figure this out by saying we've added 10 pixels to the top, 10 pixels to the bottom for a total of 20. So to keep it at the same height, we can subtract 20 from 130. 130 minus 20 is 110. If we save that and refresh it, now this is the same height that it originally was, and we've added the padding to it. So next we can change the color of the font. I'm going to change it to white, as well as the size. I'm going to do something a little bit larger. See how that looks. Maybe even a little bit bigger. There we go. So I've added a larger font face to it, and that's sort of the title of this page. Next I'm going to add some background and some actual content to this area here. To do that, first off, make sure we're working on the correct spot. So we're working on everything inside here, this content div. So we'll have to look for the content style. Back in CSS, content, right now the background color is some crazy orange color, and I want to change the background to white. Make sure that change has happened alright. There we go. So what I want to do is add an image to the left hand side in this case, and then text to the right hand side. To do that, I'm going to have to create two new divs. But before I do that, I'm going to actually create the styles inside CSS first, and I'm going to create them a little bit differently. Up until now, all of these styles that we've added are going to be used on every single page, whether it's the home page, about page, contact, or portfolio. But because this is content that's specifically going to be on the about page, you won't have the same image on the contact and portfolio page. Since it's only going to be on the about page, I'm going to create an area down here in our CSS files that only deals with styles that will be on the about page. To do that, I'm going to leave myself a comment up here. Comments are different in CSS than in HTML. Rather than what looks like an arrow, it's just a slash and a star, and the opposite to end the comment. So I'm going to call this about styles just for the about page. What kind of styles do we need? We need a div for the image and a div for the text. So I'm going to create a new style called about photo and about text with nothing in it right now. Then over here I'm going to add those divs inside the content area. So remember, we're trying to put it right in here, and we're going to get rid of that content. That word content is just a placeholder for us. I'm going to start with a image on the left. Use about photo. Close this off. Leave a comment, start of about photo. Another comment to end it off. And then put the actual photo in. So remember, the exact same way as we did the image icons for the social media sites, we can just start it off with an image source. In this case, I think I called it profile.jpg. Just make sure, profile.jpg, or you can browse to it. And if we save that and refresh the page, what should happen is content go away and that image should show up. There we go. A few things I don't really like. It's sort of rammed up to the top left, a little bit too close to the bottom, but we can deal with that later on. Next, we want to add some actual content in here. So we'll use the other div that we created called about text. Oops. Leave a comment. And at the end as well. And this is where the content will go. Save it just to make sure everything is looking okay. So some good and some bad. It showed up, which is good, but it didn't show up in the right spot. We want it to show up over here. Before we go too much farther, I'm actually going to add my content. I'm just using dummy content. Lorem ipsum. Oops. Lorem ipsum is just placeholder content. It doesn't mean anything. It's just letters put together. Obviously here you would use your own real content. Looks like a little bit too much. Why don't we just go with 3 paragraphs for now. So this is how you would just type out your content inside here. Make sure it shows up. So it is showing up, but again, it's showing up in the wrong spot. So what we have to do is make sure that this div shows up beside this div for the image. Before we go too much farther, we're also going to go to the content itself and add some padding to make sure that it's not rammed right up against the edge. Use padding of 10 pixels again. So let's push that out. That's okay. But next we have to make sure that the about photo and about text are showing up in one line together. By default, when you create a new div, it adds a line break in and pushes the next div to the next line. So to get around that, we are going to float the photo to the left You could float the about text to the right, but in this case we're also going to float it to the left as well. Didn't quite get everything in there. We also have to make sure that we know the width of the photo. In my case it's 300 pixels. In your case it might be different. My photo is 400 pixels tall. Save that. And I did something wrong. Let me just check here. So we have the about text div showing up here. About text should float left. I'm just going to test something by changing the width to something small, just to make sure that everything's showing up properly. And that showed up all right. Okay, so the issue was that the two divs that I had, they were too wide to actually fit into the content div beside each other. So we just have to define the width of the second div to make sure that this div plus this div does not equal more than the width of the content div. And the content div should be 960 pixels because it's the same width as the container div, plus that padding on each side. So if we leave it at 600 pixels, it should be okay. Next, we're going to get rid of this little space in here. We're going to put a margin to the left. 10 pixels should be enough. And then save that, move it over, it looks good. You'll notice that in this case there is too much text in here. Two ways of changing that. We can either remove some of the text and write our content to fit into this space here, or we can change the height of this content area. I'm going to go with the second route and change the height of the content area to let's say 480 pixels, just give it a little bit more room. Note that anytime you change this, it'll change on every single page that you create from now on. So that looks good to me. The only last thing I'm going to do is change the font. In this case, the font doesn't match with the other fonts that we've been using. So in about text, I'm going to change the font face to Verdana. Save that. And because it's a different font face, it actually took up more room. So I'm going to reduce the font size to 10 pixels. A little bit small. Why don't we go with 12? And that works for me. So this is pretty much what your final site will look like. We have a header, we have a logo or a place to click to get back home. We have navigation going across the top for the 4 different pages, a title area, in this case just a solid background, which is okay. And in the next video I'll show you how to add a background image if you'd like to. We have the content area here, and then the footer at the bottom with the social media icons with the background repeated tiled image. The portfolio page will be set up very similar to this about page. The only real big difference is the content that's going to be in here. And what you'll do is embed some content which you'll see how to do later on. As usual, any questions, ask them in the comments, and if you know the answer to any questions, answer them in the comments as well.